to my channel. Today we're talking about the ABH Rose Metals palette. I've created 3 looks with this palette for today's video, and we're going to jump into that in just a little bit. Before we get started, I want to thank you so much for clicking on my video. My name is Cecile, I live in the Netherlands, and I upload multiple videos a week on mostly makeup and sometimes fashion related content. So if that sounds interesting to you, then please consider subscribing. Now let's talk a little bit about this palette. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, this is what it looks like. I think the packaging is pretty. It reminds me a little bit of, what's it called, the Jackie Aina palette with that same relief. So I think it's very classic ABH. This is the color story. It's sort of a grungy rose dream. I saw a video by Morgan Turner and one of her subscribers actually described it as dirty. And she said that it wasn't only the roses, it was also the dirt that that surrounds the roses. And I guess I can see that, but also there's some warm tones and there's some, this one is almost green, as you will see in the demo in my look. So I don't think Rose Metals is necessarily the best name for this palette, but it is nice. It is very shiny and metallic, so I guess the metals part really does fit. I'm just not entirely sold on the rose part. There are some roses in here, definitely, but they lean a little bit more neutral, in my opinion. So now let's go into swatching this palette. The shadows are really soft, so you have to be a little bit careful when you take this palette with you somewhere. So we have Rose Quartz, Royal, and Haze. Look how shiny that one is. Then we have Rose Fire, Sunrise, Nova. I'm not sure if that's a hint to one of the other palettes in our palette ensemble, which is called Nouveau. It does sort of seem to match that palette's vibe. So that's the top row. Then we have Heavenly, which is my personal favorite shade. This one is called Element, and then Ashes. They swatch beautifully. I haven't swatched it yet. Then we have Dune, Nocturne, and Noble. So this is the palette all swatched out. I think there are only 4 actual matte shades and the rest is more of a metallic. Although I do think that some of the metallics are a little bit more satin. But this is what it looks like. I think this color story is just beautiful. I really like grungy, sparkly looks, so for me this is perfect. I wouldn't have minded if it was a little bit more colorful, but I have other palettes for that. So this palette I own because of its nice grunginess. And that's exactly what it's giving me. The only thing is that I can see a definite warmer side and cooler side in this palette. I'm not quite sure where this greenish gold shade fits in. I used it in one of my looks and I do think it pairs beautifully with this shade. But I don't really see a nice pairing for this one with the matte shades in the palette. That would be my one slight concern. But like I said, I can pair it with Heavenly and I think that would be a beautiful two-toned, shimmery, smoky eye. So yeah, I think that's everything about the palette. I think it retails for 55 euros. It should be available still at Douglas, Ici Paris probably. Yeah, it's pretty widely available, I'm sure. So that was everything I wanted to say for right now. Let's go into my 3 looks and then I'll talk a little bit about my final thoughts. So let's get started with the first look. I think I'm going to do an all shimmer look for my complete look. And then I'm going to do 2 combination looks right now. So let's do Ashes first. I kind of want to try out whether these shades work for my skin tone. So I'm just putting this in the crease, and as I suspected, this shade is a little bit deeper on the eyes than it appears in the pan. The thing is, I recently rewatched some of the reviews on this palette, and some people were saying that it actually appears to be the other way around. That it seems to be deep enough, but that it isn't. But of course my skin tone is very light, so I was just wondering about that. I really do like this shade. There's a similar shade in the Glam Light and Michaela collab palette, the first one. And I use that one all the time. Just building it up. And I do believe that this shade is light enough for me to build up and still blend out without using any other shades. So now let's go into Noble, which is the deepest matte. I guess it's a little bit deeper, but it's not that much deeper than the other shade. The tone is a little bit different, but the depth isn't that different. Also putting a little bit of this. Oh, by the way, I'm using a large blender brush by Boozy Shop. This is a fluffy brush that is still flat. So I can actually do all kinds of things with it. And I do have a little washcloth next to me where I can clean it off. Then I'm going into Rose Quartz, which is more of a satin shade. And I'm going to use that underneath the lower... Oh, look at that. I'm using that to blend out the bottom shade. Let me get a wipe. There's always a bunch of fallout with ABH palettes, but I don't really care because I do my eyes first anyway. So that was the Rose Quartz shade. Now with my finger I'm going into Haze, which is this, or should I save that for the last look? Yeah, I'm going into Nova, which is this more browny metallic. I'm just putting that, oh, it's a little bit more green. That's pretty. So even though this palette may not go the deepest, it's definitely not a light palette either. On my skin tone, all the looks are going to pretty much look as dramatic as this one. So I'm going back with my blender brush. I'm just blending out the edges. That looks kind of cool. I'm also blending out the inner corner. And usually I would put something brightening in the inner corner, but I'm just not going to do that. Yeah, this is the first look. Just imagine it with a nice blank face and some big lashes. I like it. Looks a little bit messy like this, but this is just a little play before I go into my real look. So I'm wiping off that same brush again and I'm going into Sunrose now for my other eye. And I'm going to make this look a little bit warmer, because this palette does contain more cool and more warm shades. And I'm doing these first two looks a little bit more traditional, so I'm putting the lighter shade in first, deepening it up. Basically I'm doing the same look, only with different undertones. But I really do like this shade. It's a little bit lighter than I was expecting, which is perfect. I do like the way they blend. Oh, by the way, I used my Glam Light Icing Primer for these two first looks. And that blends out beautifully. See, I don't mind if there's not a light matte shade, if there's a possibility to blend out the deeper matte shades. So this looks beautiful to me. I'm also going to put this on the lower lash line. And then I'm going into Dune, which is a more reddish, deeper matte. I'm just going to deepen up that first shade. I really like these shades. I usually am more drawn to the cooler tones in a palette, and I was in this case as well. But I also really like these warmer tones. There is a nice grunginess to them. Also putting this underneath the lower lash line. And I think that these shades blend out even easier than that first side. So now I'm taking my finger again, I clean it off, and I'm going into Rose Fire, which is this shade. That's beautiful. Alright, now I'm taking Element, which is this nice burgundy satin shade, and I'm putting that underneath the lower lash line. Mainly on the inner part. And of course it went a little bit too far. And then with that same shade Rose Fire, I'm just also putting that in my inner corner. Then I'm taking a little bit of Element again, and I'm putting that between the dark matte and Rose Fire. So these are the first two looks. We have a warm look, which is still a little bit ashy for some reason. And we have an actual ashy look, which looks really dark and dramatic. So this was just a little trial. Now let's go into the actual eye look for today. So I'm back. I spiked up my brows using the Pink Honey Brow Gel, and I added my Glam Light Icing Primer in the shade Classic Vanilla. And now let's do an actual full eye look. So what I thought I could do, I've used these and this one on camera now. I want to do a cool toned look with only shimmers, focusing on those more icy tones. Icy, smoky tones. I think that's going to work out great. So I'm taking this small, round, flat shader brush. How many adjectives can I use? And I'm going into the shade Heavenly, which is really intriguing to me because it looks sort of light gray. And then when you hold it in the light like this, it looks sort of light green. So I think it's sort of a very pale yellow, which is a kind of shade I really like. I also like the fact that even though I want this to be a cool toned look, it's not going to be quite as obvious just because of the combination of slightly more warm and slightly more cool toned shades and also neutral shades. So I'm just putting this all the way in the inner corner, also taking it slightly on the lid. This is a beautiful inner corner shade. I know Angelica Niekvist said that there really wasn't an inner corner highlight for people with light skin in this palette. But for me, I think this one is light enough. I'm also going to take it slightly more on my lid, in a bit of a diagonal. And I might go back with this one later. I feel like this is a very effortless palette. Those first two looks took me about 10 minutes. This one is probably going to go quite quickly as well. For me, this palette is very intuitive as well. Just taking it up really high. I just like to do that with my shimmers, especially if they're a little bit lighter. Like this. Look, there's a little bit of a green sort of reflect in this. Now I'm going into Haze, which is, in my opinion, the most special shimmer. I'm just using the same brush for this. And I think these shadows are pretty fragile because mine got a little bit smushed in transit. Nothing I couldn't fix by pressing down on them, but just wanted to mention that. So I'm just taking this underneath, blending it in with that first shade, and I'm taking it up pretty much just as high, only in a diagonal. I think if you take your finger, this is going to go a lot quicker. But I need it to be a little bit more precise. This, and then finally I'm going into Nocturne, which is a slightly more bluish, also a little bit brown. And I'm putting that on the outside. Taking it slightly into the crease like this. And this is going really easily. And that's already the shape that I need. These shades are really soft, pigmented, like I said, a little bit squishy. But they work quite easily. There is quite a bit of fallout, I do have to say. So I really like this shape like this. Now I just need something on the lower lash line. So I haven't used Royal yet, which is this dark cranberry metallic. So I'm just taking it on the same brush, I did wipe it off, and I'm putting it very close to the lower lash line. Because I like this shape. I think that's it. I'm just taking a pencil brush and I'm going into Heavenly, that first shade. And I'm just making sure that it's nicely blended at the bottom. And now let's see, did I use all the shades? I think so. I used all the shades on camera, so now I can confirm for you that this is a wonderful palette. But let's finish up the look and I'll talk a little bit more about it. So I'm back. This is my final look, which of course you've already seen in the intro. Let me quickly bring you up to speed with what I used. Like I said, Pink Honey in my brows and also the Benefit micro filling pen. I used my NARS light reflecting foundation in the shade Gobi, which is honestly just my perfect foundation at the moment. I used 2 eye pencils, this one from Chanel in the shade Romance in my lower waterline to match the rose shade, and this black liner in my top lash line. And then I used some Essence Lash Princess waterproof mascara in combination with the high fashion lashes from Michaela X Glam Light. From that same collection I also used the Lucky Charms lip kit, which is still my favorite. There's actually a slight green reflect in this lip gloss which will match the inner corner shade. And then I used my Hourglass palette for my powders. I used a combination of these 2 setting powders, and then I used this blush. From Lethal Cosmetics I used one of my favorite highlighters. As you can see, it's well loved. I'm not even sure what the shade is of this one. Flux. The shade is called Flux. And it's a really beautiful, intense, pinky highlight. Then I used my Benefit Boing concealer underneath my eyes. And for bronzer I used this little baby here. This is from the Simpsons X Makeup Revolution. It's a liquid bronzer. It's a little bit red, but I do think it blends out beautifully. And that should be everything that's on my face. Now let's chat just a little bit more about the palette. So my opinion on this is that even though it's called Rose Metals, I like this palette mostly for the more cooler and warmer tones. I don't necessarily love the rose shades in here. So this one and this one and this one I'd say are the most rosy. Those were my least favorite shades so far. I do really like the mattes, especially this Sunrise one really got me by surprise because of its blendability. They are a little bit drier than, like for instance, my Soft Glam palette for some reason, but they do blend out beautifully and they do build a little bit. So I think this is a very nice and workable palette. I'd say if you like grungy looks, then go for it. I must say I do agree with the fact that it doesn't go deep enough. I thought it was alright, and for me it definitely is, but this shade honestly isn't that much deeper than this shade. So it would have been nice if there was a deeper, more cool toned brown in this palette. I don't agree with the fact that it isn't light enough because I feel like I can use this shade Heavenly as a beautiful inner corner shade. But of course some people prefer an even brighter inner corner. I can't argue with that. So overall I'm still very happy with this palette. I'm glad I got to do my review on it finally. And let me show you the swatches again. I mean, these swatches don't lie, they're beautiful. So I think this is a very interesting color story. I think this is the good ABH quality, and I'm very excited for what else they have in store for us. So thank you so much for watching my video. I wish you a happy day, and I'll see you in the next one.